Libby, did I get the name correct or close anyway? I did. Okay, thank you. You know, when you're not a musician and people send you the titles of things that aren't hymns, sometimes you don't get them correctly. So I wanted to make sure I got it correct for her since she worked so hard on that big piece to open us for Palm Sunday. Welcome to Palm Sunday. We're glad you're here. It's a little bit muted for the way that we usually do Palm Sunday. I hope everybody got a palm cross. Did anybody not get a palm cross? I'll take one from the choir. I know you got extra ones. That's what I meant, okay? So, did everybody get a palm cross? We wanted to make sure you got palm crosses. And I hope you saw some of the information. They are actually part of a ministry in Tanzania. And the indigenous people there make them, and then, you know, this is a way that they support themselves. And so they're not very expensive, but we thought they were kind of a nice keepsake for those of you that were able to be here today. We actually had some out this week for people who weren't going to be here today, so they can come by and get some. If you're joining us virtually and would like one, if you'll let us know, and even if you're not in a place where you can come get one, we'll make sure that we get one to you. And if you happen to live at the beach, I'll even bring it to you. So, you know. Well, I want to welcome you this morning, those of you that gathered here with us, and also those that are gathering with us virtually. I want to let people know who still are a little anxious about returning to in-person worship, that because of the size of our sanctuary and because of the way that our facility folks have marked it off, there's plenty of space for social distancing, and so I hope you'll consider coming and being here in person next Sunday as we celebrate Easter. Now, I said to Linda earlier that it was my hope that today she would get to meet our new associate pastor, and she got all excited. She said, "We're getting an associate pastor?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And she said, "Well, that doesn't mean you're leaving on it, does it?" I said, "Well, if I leave, the associate pastor leaves because he lives with me." So this is Levi. Levi, can you come here and say that microphone's not on, so you're wasting your time over there. I know, because you test it whenever you come. For about 5 years, maybe not early on, but at least for the last 4 years or so, Levi has always come to a worship service and helped me make announcements. And his one request, and as a grandfather, it's amazing that I never let him do this, his request always was, "When do I get a microphone?" And I always said, "Maybe later." And so our last Sunday at Palm Harbor, I said to him as we got him to make the announcements, I said, "Okay, here's your microphone. You go ahead and make the announcements." He did a lot better job than I had ever done. So I made a mistake. He should have been making the announcements all along, right? Yeah, right, yeah. Way too quick. Okay, you going to sit over there? Okay. So, you know, that means obviously he did not drive by himself. So let me introduce you to my wife, Eileen. You can stand up, honey, so they can see you. We are now a family that's fully shot. And so we are all feeling a little more comfortable going places, as I know many of you have now also gotten your shots, and so I know you're feeling more comfortable about going places also. I want to invite you to join us on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. That service is called a Maundy Thursday service. It's a celebration of the Last Supper and the institution of the Lord's Supper. And so we are actually going to do a communion with a kind of move into a Good Friday tenebrae kind of thing. And so I hope you can come and be a part of that and join us. We'll also be doing that virtually, so people can join us also on Facebook Live. I don't know if you could catch the slide in the announcements, but we delivered the things you provided for Eustis Elementary School this week. And I didn't count them, and I don't know if Kay counted them, but I know they counted them. And this is what they said you provided. 250 spiral notebooks, 75 pencil pouches, 50 binders, and over 1,000 masks for children. They were over the moon about what you had done and the way you had responded. And I was very, very proud of you and honored to be your pastor when you respond that way within our own community. I do want to share something before we do the opening litany for this morning. You know, when you've been a pastor for a number of years, things run through your mind as the service is getting ready to start. And I was listening to you this morning, as I always listen to you. And of course, we have a little larger attendance today, and I know some of you were very excited to see each other. And so from across the pews and maybe across the aisles, you were speaking to each other. When I was in Venice at Grace Church, in the traditional service, there was a lady who, for about 10 minutes before the service, would lead the congregation in the singing of hymns, very traditional, old-time favorite hymns. There was a lady who played the piano, and so this lady's name was Pat. And so Pat would lead those folks who were there in singing these hymns. But like you guys were doing this morning, people are always excited to see each other, so you know what happened. Pat was trying to lead them in singing hymns, and they were busy with each other. So one day she came in and said to me, "I have a request." And I said, "Okay, Pat, what is your request?" She said, "I want you to make the congregation stop visiting with each other before the worship service." And I said, "Well, Pat, number one, I'm impressed that you think I would have the power to do that." I said, "Secondly, I really have to question, why would I do that?" I said, if this is really a fellowship, there's not much other time in the worship service that people get to kind of visit with each other. I said to her, since she was in the choir, I said, "Do you want them doing that during the anthem?" "Well, heavens no." I said, "Well, I'm not going to let them do it during the sermon." So I said, you know, sing your hymns, and if people that want to sing will sing, and people that want to visit will visit. And she said, "Well, you know, it's supposed to be quiet in preparation for worship." And I said, "Then maybe we need to do away with singing the hymns." She said, "You are such a smart aleck." I said, "My teachers from first grade could have told you the same thing." So anyway, yes. But anyway, we continued to sing hymns, and after I left, she had an experience that I hope we never have here. In the midst of her singing her pre-service hymns, a person who obviously was not a member of the congregation, who wandered in off the streets, walked down the center aisle, and like us, they had steps, and he came up right by the altar and took off all his clothes. I so wish I had been there to see that. But anyway, because, you know, I always look for biblical references, and David danced naked before the Lord, so I thought, well, maybe that was David, you know, reincarnated. But anyway, I don't think it was. We are glad that you're here on Palm Sunday. Please keep your clothes on, okay? I appreciate that. And you will appreciate the fact that I'm going to keep my clothes on also, okay? So I want to invite you to join me. We're going to do a litany for Palm Sunday at the beginning of the service. And then doing something a little different, we have a sending litany at the end of the service. And so the litany at the beginning of the service is entitled, "I Love a Crowd." And as is usual, your response is in yellow. And rather than people, I think it says many. But I may have changed it. I did change it to people. What can I say? Okay. I love a crowd, but a crowd can be dispersed. I love a crowd, but a crowd can be misled. I love a crowd, but crowds don't last forever. I love a crowd, but a crowd can offer a false sense of protection. I love a crowd, but a crowd can trample and overlook. I love Jesus. Jesus is all the crowd you'll ever need. Hosanna. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. I invite you now to join in whatever way you're comfortable behind your mask in our opening hymn this morning, Tell Me the Stories of Jesus. So let's get one thing clear right now, okay? It's my fault, all right? So I know you're sitting there going, well, those words don't look like the words they're singing. So somehow the choir and I got sideways, and I either picked a different hymn or the wrong hymn or something. It's not the people up in the balcony, you know? It's not the choir. It's my fault. So I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope you enjoyed what they had to share with us this morning. So you guys did a great job, by the way, without having to word stuff. So.
We can sing that one too.
Just back down, okay? I don't know. I'm going to take responsibility, Dennis. Okay? So, anyway, you know what? What did we learn a few weeks ago? It doesn't make any difference whose fault it is, does it? And besides, my guess is we got to hear the hymn that God wanted us to hear. Not because of me, but in spite of me, maybe. Okay? So, you know what? I bet people were surprised when Jesus broke the bread and the fish and handed them out also. So I hope you were surprised this morning. So I want to spend a few moments in prayer this morning. Ro let me know that her friend Dale had successful surgery this past week, and they're still waiting for some results, but she has another prayer request for her friend Brian. who's going to have some heart surgery. And I wonder if there are any of you that might have a prayer request that you would like to share with the congregation this morning. I want us to remember our Jewish brothers and sisters who are kind of in line with us right now because they're celebrating Passover right now. Sometimes Passover is very close to Easter and sometimes it's widely separated, but it's very, very close to Easter this year. And I don't know, do y'all know how they picked the date for Easter? Y'all know that? I know you're probably thinking, let's just move on, okay? Well, it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So the spring equinox is in March 21st. So we're about a week away from that. And if you were out last night or this morning, you saw that we certainly had a full moon. And that's why next Sunday is going to be, it wasn't completely full, but it's going to be full next week. So that's why we're having Easter next week. Let's pray together. Well, God, we give thanks that we are reminded of your willingness to rescue us. And that this week our brothers and sisters of the Jewish faith are celebrating your rescue of them thousands of years ago from Exodus in Egypt, from exile in Egypt. And we are reminded that you are the great rescuer and that you have come also to rescue us out of exile. And so we give thanks for that. And we give thanks for the celebration of this week that we call Holy, that gives us tremendous insight into not only your ministry, but your willingness and unconditional love for each of us. And so this morning, we just invite you to come into our presence, come into our lives, come and be near to us as we worship you either together this morning or virtually this morning. Be with us in this place. Pour out your Spirit upon us and touch us and make us whole. Heal us and soothe us. Surround us with your grace and with your peace. And then send us out into this world so we might be your peacemakers in a world that desperately needs to experience peace. And so as we march through this week, let us be mindful of your events of that first Holy Week, including the cost that you paid on Friday, so that we may join you in the glory next Sunday. And so we pray that you be especially close to us during this week. And we ask and give thanks for all of these things in the name of Jesus, who teaches us to pray together, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And now I would like to invite you, if you are able, to stand as we read the gospel lesson this morning. Continuing in Luke's gospel, the 15th chapter, verses 17 through 32. And this morning I'm using the translation that's entitled The Message. That brought him to his senses. He said, All those farmhands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. I'm going back to my father. I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against God. I have sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand. Excuse me. He got up and went home to his father. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him. His heart pounding, he ran out, embraced him, and kissed him. The son started his speech. "Father, I have sinned against God. I have sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again." But the father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get a prize-winning heifer and roast it. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found." And they began to have a wonderful time. All this time, his older son was out in the field. When the day's work was done, he came in, and as he approached the house, he heard the music and dancing. Calling over one of the houseboys, he asked, "What is going on?" He told him, "Your brother came home. Your father has ordered a feast, barbecued beef, because he has him home safe and sound." The older brother stomped off in angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. The son said, "Look, how many years I've stayed here, serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. But have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? Then this son of yours who has thrown away your money on prostitutes shows up, and you go all out with a feast." His father said, "Son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he is alive. He was lost, and he is found." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And now may this song prepare you for our time of sermon together.
He lives, my
but I don't think I can. So what we've proven here this morning is that there are more than one song with the same title, apparently. So Ennis and I will have to do a better job of making sure I'm looking at the same songs that he thinks I'm looking at, because obviously so far I haven't been. We got one more chance. I don't want you to worry about it during the sermon. And I don't want you to say anything about it if I go 3 for 3 today, okay? So thank goodness our musicians just play on. Play on. They obviously have all worked with clergy before, and they don't let it bother them, you know. Well, we've got this week and next week when we continue in this parable called the Prodigal Son. And, you know, we're looking at how the grace of God not only changes individuals, but also how it creates a unique human society. And the story, while you may not have ever thought of it, is really centered around the main theme of the Bible. And you may never have thought of what the theme of the Bible is. You know, the Bible is about exile and homecoming. It's about having to leave and then finding ways to come back. The reality is that we live in a world where we actually experience a kind of homesickness. Now, I don't know if you've ever been homesick or not. You know, like when you went away to camp as a child, or maybe even just away on a trip, maybe business, maybe pleasure, and longed to kind of come home. I know when I used to work at Leesburg in the summers, especially when they added elementary camp as part of the camp experience there was almost always at least one child who early in the week just couldn't stand it and wanted to go home. They just couldn't stay there another minute. And of course, our job was always to try and make them comfortable, because by the time they got to the end of the week, they were usually pretty happy. But theologians and philosophers have often written about how you and I are not really at home in this world. And so I want to see what this parable has to say about that. And we're going to look at 3 things this morning. We're going to look at the human condition, the divine solution, and a new communion. Now, we all know that home is the place that fits us. It's the place that suits us. It's the place that has familiar sights and sounds and even familiar smells. It's the place where we belong. But the problem is that our original home was in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden is very different than the world we live in today. The garden was a place of infinite beauty. The garden was a place where work was not drudgery. Work was not difficult. In fact, work was life-giving and life-sustaining. It was a place where the people lived in the very presence of God. I don't know if you remember from the beginning of the Bible, but it says that in the cool of the evening, God would come and he would walk with them and talk with them. In other words, they had the counsel of God from God's very own lips. And the other thing that filled the garden was the endless love of God. It was the perfect place. All of this was in the garden. created for us and for all that we needed. But like the younger brother in the story, those who lived in the garden chafed under the few rules that God had put in place. I mean, if you remember the story, he told them that they could eat of anything in the garden except the tree, the knowledge of good and evil. And of course, they decided they wanted to eat of that tree. And ultimately, what they decided and what the temptation was from the serpent is, the reason you can't eat of that tree is because if you eat of that tree, you will know what God knows. And what the temptation for them really was is they wanted to be their own God. And that's what the younger brother wanted. He wanted to be his own person. And so, as you know, they get tossed out. The younger brother leaves the home. And they, like the younger brother, become lost and hungry and exiled in a way. You see, you and I were created for the garden. But we don't live in the garden. So have you ever felt homeless? I don't mean without a house in the way that we understand homelessness now, but have you ever felt alienated, like you don't belong? I'm going to share an experience with you, and I'm going to encourage you not to take this personally, because this is not an experience that I've had here at First Eustis. But I can tell you that as a United Methodist pastor, who, as you know, we get moved from place to place, and you get moved to places you do not choose to go, and maybe sometimes don't want to go, and leave a place you don't want to leave, and sometimes you go to a group of people who do not want you to be there because they want the person that was already there to still be here. Now, it's not always conscious. It's not always, kind of so obvious, but sometimes it's subtly shared with you. I remember one time a lady said to me, you're just a visitor here. And the reality is that was a good lesson for me. Because see, I can never be here as long as you've been here. Because if you are still alive, you will always have been here longer than I've been here. One lady said to me one time when I was encouraging the church to do something she didn't like, she said to me, I was here when you got here, and I'll be here when you leave. And then that smart aleck part of me came out, and I said, well, not if you die. But the reality is, there is a sense that we experience alienation in different places. And we try and avoid it, and we try not to think about it, because it doesn't feel good. Now, let me just say that I would say that in 99.9% of the time, my experience has been that people called United Methodists have a tremendous capacity to love the pastor they have or had, and at the same time love the new pastor when he or she arrives. I don't know how you guys do that, but you seem very capable of doing it. But the reality is in the greater schemes of the world, we don't really fit in. I don't know how many of you watched the movie The Lion King, but in there's this wonderful song about we're all part of the circle of life. And they sing and they dance. I thought about playing it for you this morning, but I'd probably mess that up too, so I'm glad I didn't. But anyway, later in the movie, the son says to the king, but Dad, don't we eat the antelopes? And he says, well, yes, of course we do, son, but eventually we die. And then we fertilize the grass, and then the antelopes eat the grass. So we're all part of the circle of life. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not the world I want to be a part of. That's not how I want to look at the world. But C.S. Lewis tells us that while we all find ways to be comfortable in this world, and we do it by using memories. And yet you and I both know that no matter how wonderful our memories are, you cannot go back and recreate them. That old saying, you can't go home again, because when you go back, you're a different person, and in reality, home is a different place than when you were last there. It's no longer that place that you have in your memory. And the reality is that somehow in humankind's collective memory, we remember the garden. Well, not because we were there, but because we were created for it. We were created for that beauty, for that love. We were created for a place where there's no death and no suffering. And we long for it. No matter how good our lives are, no matter how successful we are, no matter how happy we are. And this is the reason. It's in our very DNA. So we long to be in the garden. And we're not. So what do we do about this? Well, I think the story addresses that as it answers what God has done for us. Now, in reality, you might be surprised to know that there is some controversy around this parable. And this is where the controversy arises. Because when you hear the story, when you hear it told by Jesus, when you hear it read, in whatever translation, it appears that the son is reconciled, the younger son is reconciled, the younger son is brought back into full communion, into his full place in the family at no cost. In fact, when the younger son says, Father, make me as one of your hired men so that I can pay back what I've taken, the father will not hear of it. And the story tells the servants to bring the robe and bring the family ring, meaning he's been fully reinstated. And the reason this is a problem is because traditional Christianity says because of sin in the world, somebody has to pay the price to be reconciled back to God. It's the theory of atonement. And so how can it be that the Son is restored without any cost being paid? Well, remember at the beginning of this chapter, I always think it's important to look at why would Jesus tell this story? And if you'll remember, he is surrounded by sinners and tax collectors. And they are listening to the things that he is teaching. And the Pharisees come along and they say to him, "Why are you hanging around these people?" Now, I don't know if you've ever spent much time with a rabbi. I don't know if you have any Jewish friends. But one of the things that I always say about rabbis is they always answer a question with a question. In other words, Jesus did not just answer them. He told them a story. In fact, he tells them 3 stories. And you know the three stories, because in the first story, he tells them about a sheep that gets lost. When the shepherd brings the sheep into the sheep pen, he counts them. And in the morning, he'd left with 100 sheep, and when he got home, he had 99. And so he puts the 99 in the pen, and he goes out and looks for the other. And then he tells a story about a lady that had some coins, and when she counted her coins, there was one missing. And so she literally tears her house upside down looking for the lost coin. So in those two stories, there's a sheep that's lost, there's a coin that's lost, and somebody goes to look for them. But in the third story, the one we've been looking at, there is a lost boy. And nobody goes to look for him. And Jesus does this intentionally in this story, because everybody listening to him that day would have known who was responsible to go look for the lost boy. And the person that was responsible to do that was the older brother. You know, we've talked a lot about how older brothers got the majority of an inheritance. And the reason they got that, it was their responsibility to keep the family together. And so the older brother should have come to his father and said, "Father, my younger brother has lost his way. I want to go and find him and bring him back into the family where he'll be safe, where he'll be a part of us. And I don't care what it costs me to do that." But of course, this older brother doesn't do that. Edmund Clowney, who's a theologian and pastor, preaches a sermon on this text called Sharing the Father's Love. And in that sermon, he tells the story of a young soldier who is missing in action in Vietnam. Of course, the family is devastated when they get the news, and they go through all the official channels, and of course the military does all they can to try and find him, and he cannot be located. And so the older brother gets on a plane and flies to Vietnam. And he goes into the most dangerous parts of the jungle, where the fighting is the fiercest, to look for his brother. Now, it's interesting because the story goes that he was spared from harm by both sides because they heard what he was doing, and they had such great respect for him. And the story circulated that they would let each other know that the brother was in the area looking for his brother. See, true older brother would go look for the younger brother. He would have said, "Father, whatever it costs, I need to go and bring my brother home safely." And really, it would have been costly, because when the father says in the story, "My son, everything I have is yours," that was true. Literally. Because remember, he had already divided up the estate and giving the younger brother his portion. So now the rest of the estate belonged to the older brother when the father died. So there was going to be a cost. So the father reinstates the younger brother at the expense of the older brother. It was free for the younger brother, but not for the older. And Jesus tells the story this way in front of the audience he's talking to, because the sinners and tax collectors would have been seen as the younger brother, as most of us are also. But Jesus gave the younger brother in the story an older brother who was a Pharisee. And he would have done that so the Pharisees would have recognized him. You see, we all need an older brother who will come not just from the other side of the world to bring us out of exile and to rescue us, but actually who will come down from heaven. We need an older brother who says, I don't care what the cost is. I will pay whatever the cost is, even up to death. And that's what the story of Holy Week is about. Jesus' willingness to come and his willingness to pay the cost. His willingness to become exiled himself, to be a wanderer. Remember what it said when Jesus said one time, foxes had holes and dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. In other words, he came and became exiled himself, became a wanderer, so that you and I would not have to be. So what difference does all this make? I mean, what is this about? I mean, what's at the heart of the story? What's at the heart of the title of the sermon today? We had to celebrate. Well, not just in ancient times, but also in modern times. How do you celebrate homecoming? Well, you eat. You know. I mean, you know, and you know, a few weeks ago I asked how come you guys didn't kind of get up and dance a little bit during one of the songs, and Louise said to me, well, we're Methodist. And you know, Methodists eat for everything. We eat when babies are born. We eat when kids graduate. We eat when kids go off to college. We eat when kids come home from college. We eat when people get married. We eat when people die. I mean, when you know that somebody's passed away in a home, what's your first thought? Well, should I take them potato salad or coleslaw? Okay? See, because we know that there's something special about gathering around that table. And in ancient times, the evening meal was this amazing thing where you got food for your body, you got laughter for your soul, and you got love and sharing for your heart. And many of us know the importance of that family time gathered around the table. It is the time when most of us feel most at home. I don't know if it's like this in your house, but isn't it amazing that most of the time when people come by to visit, even if they're not coming by for a meal, I mean, you can have them sit in the living room or in the family room, but most often you gather in the kitchen around the table, even if you're not eating, even if you're just having a cup of coffee. It's where we gather to share and be with each other. So it's not a mistake that when the Bible talks about Jesus' return, it talks about a banquet. It talks about us sitting down and eating with Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac at these magnificent feasts. So what kind of people would we be if we could taste that food and if we could feel God kissing our neck like the Father in the story? Well, we would have hope. We would have peace. We would have joy. We would have no fear. So where can you get a taste like that? I mean, where could that ever happen? Well, the reality is, it happens at this table. It happens at communion. It is the place where Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. Do this to reconnect with God. You know, early on, and for many years, the Lord's Supper was actually a real meal. I mean, you know that first Lord's Supper, they had eaten a meal. And then at the end of the meal, Jesus takes the bread and takes the cup. But they had shared a meal together already. And so this Thursday night, we're going to do that again together and be reminded that in the communion, you were invited into the intimacy of being with Christ. The Son who was actually dead and is now alive. And as we eat that meal in faith, we know that Jesus is with us. And we can almost see him. But it's very important to recognize, and we haven't been able to do this in the pandemic. I don't know how you have experienced communion in the past, but when I've done communion in the past, I've not usually been the one that has served. Actually, the people that serve are your brothers and sisters in the middle of the congregation. So that it's actually your brother and your sister who offers you the elements. I will forever remember that we had a couple in the church in Naples that were from Alabama. And I finally had to ask her if she, I told her, I said, you have to change how you're serving communion. We did couples, and so the husband we had a well like this, and people would kneel, and so the husband would walk along and offer people the bread, and then she would come along with the cup. And one Sunday I was listening to her, and she would say, Bob, this is the blood of Christ offered for you. How's your mom? I'm like, how's your mom? And she said to me, well, from Alabama, you got to ask people how they're doing. You got to ask them what's going on. I said, yeah, but, we got 300 people we need to serve communion. She said, well, send them to the other side. Because I need to connect with the people I'm serving. Well, I said, well, okay, I guess so. But, that's the reality of it. It's this intimate time with Christ, but it's not a alone time with Christ. It's a time that we share with our brothers and sisters. It's because that's why it's important for us to talk together, to learn together, to grow together, to confess together, to hold each other accountable. It's important for us to share life together. It's especially important when we feel alienated from our true home. But the solution is that we have a true older brother. And that older brother helps us share life together. And someday, you and I will stand before God. And we'll look at God and say, God, I know you accept me because I have a true older brother who came to search for me and was willing to pay the price to bring me back into the family. Let's pray together. Well, during this week we call Holy, we see what Jesus was willing to do. And we are reminded that he has, across the ages and across the spheres, found ways to leave heaven and come to us. He is the older brother who is willing to come and search for us and pay the cost to bring us back home. Might we say yes to that older brother today? In Jesus' name, amen.
I hear the Savior say,
goodness, I was redeemed by the choir. Holy moly. Although, you know, I grew up playing baseball, and if you hit 333 in baseball, you're not too bad. Okay? So I was right 1 out of 3 times. That's not too bad. So I want to invite you to join me now in a rather different way for us to depart from here on Palm Sunday. It's called the Sending Litany for Palm Sunday. And I invite you to join along in the yellow part. This is a vision of the way it can be, the way it should be. Shouts of welcome, a joyful procession, a community celebrating together. The same vision is offered to us today. We can welcome Christ into our lives. We can celebrate His transforming power. How swiftly things changed back then, and how swiftly, too, we can be distracted. May we hold fast to His vision of goodness, peace from the practice of justice, equality from the practice of respect. As this week unfolds, we let ourselves be overtaken by God's love. We will pour it back out into the world. Go in peace, my friends.
Hey, Libby.